Welcome to Across the Pitch. Ladies and gentlemen, buckle up tighter than a striker's shin guards because we've got more drama than an entire season of your favorite soap opera. From 8-goal demolitions to last gasp winners, today had everything, including the kitchen sink, and a few defenders who apparently think they're strikers. Let's kick things off at the Etihad, where Manchester City turned their FA Cup tie against Salford into the kind of performance that makes you question whether they even have a setting called mercy. 8 goals, 0 conceded, and more highlights than a hairdresser's portfolio. And folks, the headlines write themselves. Jack Grealish finally broke his scoring drought smoother than a barista's morning pour, converting from the spot after being fouled in the box. You could see the relief on his face was bigger than his famous calves. But the real star of this show was James McAtee, who decided to turn the match into his personal highlight reel faster than you can say, hat trick hero. The young midfielder has been overlooked more times than a short goalkeeper, but today he showed exactly why Guardiola calls him one of the biggest talents. 3 goals, each one cleaner than the last, and suddenly everyone's wondering why he hasn't been getting more minutes than a stopwatch. His movement was sharper than a surgeon's scalpel, his finishing more precise than a German train schedule, and his overall performance? Well, that was just pure footballing poetry. The subplot here that's got everyone talking faster than a commentator during a penalty shootout is the Kyle Walker situation. The defender wasn't even in the squad, and Guardiola's post-match comments about Walker wanting to explore a move abroad were more revealing than a defender's shorts after a sliding tackle. But with City awaiting confirmation of that £33 million move for Uzbekistan defender Abdukadir Husanov from Lens, maybe they're already planning for life after Kyle's smoother than a pre-match warm-up. Speaking of smooth transitions, let's jet over to Stamford Bridge, where Chelsea put 5 past Morecambe in a performance that had everything but the kitchen sink. And if you thought defenders were just there to stop goals, Tosin Adarabioyo clearly didn't get the memo. The center back channeled his inner Roberto Carlos with not one, but 2 absolute thunderbolts from outside the box. The first might have taken a deflection more fortunate than a lottery winner. But that second strike? That was purer than spring water. The Blues' performance showed more depth than an ocean trench, with Christopher Nkunku bouncing back from an early penalty miss faster than a goalkeeper's apology after a howler. When Joao Felix decided to join the party with his late double, he was clinical enough to make a surgeon jealous. And how about that save from Morecambe keeper Harry Burgoyne in the first half? The man denied Felix with a stop that was more spectacular than a fireworks display. Over at Anfield, Liverpool served up the kind of performance against Accrington Stanley that reminds you why the FA Cup is more magical than a Harry Potter marathon. Young Jayden Danns came off the bench to score with the kind of composure that was smoother than butter on hot toast, while 16-year-old Rio Ngumoha made history as the Reds' youngest ever starter. Talk about a debut that'll be remembered longer than a manager's grudge. Federico Chiesa finally opening his Liverpool account was the kind of moment that gets fans more excited than a last-minute winner, and Arne Slot's squad rotation worked better than a Swiss timepiece. 4-0 might look comfortable on paper, but Accrington gave it more fight than a cat in a bathtub. Josh Woods even rattled the crossbar to remind everyone that the magic of the cup is alive and kicking harder than a penalty taker. The way Liverpool balanced youth and experience was more impressive than a tightrope walker, and that Chiesa goal? Pure Italian craftsmanship, smoother than fresh gelato. Now, let's hop over to Germany, where Bayern Munich managed to squeeze past Gladbach, tighter than a defender's marking job. Harry Kane proving once again he's more reliable than a German train timetable, converting from the spot for his 15th Bundesliga goal of the season. The England captain's currently leading the scoring charts smoother than a freshly trimmed pitch, but it's the way Bayern dominated possession, 78% in the first half, that really tells the story. Vincent Kompany's side might have had the ball longer than a teenager with their phone, but sometimes football's not about possession, it's about precision. And when Michael Olise went down in the box, well, Kane buried that penalty faster than a squirrel hides nuts. Nicholas pulled off more saves than a discount warehouse to keep it at 1-0. including those spectacular stops from Goretzka, Davies, and Gnabry that were prettier than a sunset. The way Bayern kept pushing until the final whistle shows they're hungrier than a striker on a goal drought, and that's exactly what you need when you're chasing titles. Over in Milan, the Rossoneri's 1-1 draw with Cagliari was more frustrating than trying to open a jar with wet hands. If you're wondering if the Sergio Conceição effect is wearing off faster than temporary hair dye, well, the evidence is starting to stack up higher than a defender at a corner. The way they started was brighter than stadium floodlights, with Morata's finish smoother than a silk shirt, but then Maignan had the kind of moment that gives goalkeeping coaches nightmares. Letting Zortea's scuffed effort squirm in like a teenager trying to make curfew? That's the kind of mistake that keeps you up longer than pre-match caffeine. And while we're on the topic of Italian drama, how about that Turin derby? Juventus and Torino serving up a 1-1 draw that had more twists and turns than a mountain road. Kenan Yıldız's opener was cleaner than a new whistle. The way he cut inside and finished with his left foot? That was smoother than a bowling alley. But Nikola Vlasic's equalizer in first-half stoppage time had more heat on it than a summer training session. Both managers getting sent off just added the kind of spice that makes derby days more memorable than your first football boots. The intensity was higher than a goalkeeper's leap. The tackles were flying in faster than transfer rumors, and the atmosphere? Electric enough to power a small city. Over in Udine, Atalanta looked more toothless than a hockey player, getting held to a 0-0 draw that less excitement than a preseason friendly. The woodwork and Marco Carnesecchi's heroics were busier than a Black Friday sale, with Alexis Sanchez hitting both the post and crossbar in what was his 200th Serie A appearance. The Chilean's reaction was more frustrated than a striker in a goal drought. And you can understand why. Sometimes football gives you more chances than a forgiving referee. But if you don't take them, well, you end up with a point that feels emptier than a stadium during lockdown. Back in England, Nottingham Forest's magical run continues smoother than a hot knife through butter. Their 2-0 victory over Luton was more impressive than a perfectly executed bicycle kick, with Ryan Yates and Ramon Sosa doing the business. But let's talk about young Rio Ngumoha, becoming Forest's youngest starter at 16 years and 135 days? That's the kind of record that sticks around longer than gum on a boot. The way Forest balanced youth and experience was more masterful than a conductor leading an orchestra, and that clean sheet? They're fifth in a row, more consistent than a metronome. Meanwhile, Bournemouth turned their FA Cup tie against West Brom into the kind of show that belongs on Broadway. Dango Ouattara playing like someone using cheat codes, bagging 2 goals that were cleaner than a referee's notebook on opening day. But it wasn't just about his finishing. His movement was more elusive than a bar of soap in the shower, his link-up play smoother than a jazz solo, and his overall performance? Pure football artistry. The Cherries are now unbeaten in 9 games. Talk about timing your run of form better than a perfectly executed offside trap. And finally, let's talk about the kind of upset that makes the FA Cup more special than your grand secret recipe. Plymouth Argyle, currently sitting at the bottom of the championship with more losses than a misplaced sock collection, went to Brentford and snatched a 1-0 win that was more surprising than a goalkeeper scoring a bicycle kick. Morgan Whittaker's 82nd minute winner was timed better than a Swiss watch, placed more perfectly than a chess grandmaster's move, and celebrated more wildly than a lottery winner. Poor Thomas Frank, his FA Cup record is now looking shakier than a defender on roller skates, with Brentford failing to clear the 3rd round for the 3rd consecutive season. But that's the beauty of this competition, isn't it? On any given day, any team can write themselves into folklore faster than a sports journalist on deadline. And here's something to keep you debating hotter than a summer training session. What's happened to the art of rotation? We've seen some managers handle it smoother than a Zidane turn, while others made more mess of it than a Sunday League kickabout. Look at City and Chelsea. They changed their entire teams and still scored 13 goals between them. Meanwhile, some sides looked more disjointed than a broken jigsaw when they tried to rotate. Is it about squad depth? Training intensity? Or maybe just that magical cup fairy dust that turns underdogs into world beaters faster than you can say giant killing. Speaking of magic, how about these young players stepping up bigger than a growth spurt? Ngumoha at Forest, McAtee at City, Dan's at Liverpool. We're seeing the next generation shine brighter than a new set of floodlights. Is this the year of youth taking over smoother than a generational handover? Or are we just seeing the benefits of bigger squads and more opportunities? That's all for today's roundup, folks. Keep those scarves raised higher than a striker's offside trap, those debates more heated than a Derby Day atmosphere. And remember, in football, like in life, it's not about how many times you fall, but how many times you get back up. Unless you're Manchester City, then it's probably just about how many goals you can score before halftime. Across the pitch, over and out.